building Adventist Christian communities today. There are a number of presuppositions as I start. One is that community is an important concept. Another presupposition is that building communities is a different kind of thing today from what it was in the past, yesterday. And the third presupposition is that building a community does not go by itself, but it requires effort. So building an Adventist Christian community today, that is what we are going to talk about. Now, when I sent in the title of the topic, I can almost be sure that Lauren is changing it a bit, and so he has also this time and put the element of digital community right in the title of what he advertised. I'm going to talk about the digital aspect of communities in the second part of the presentation, but the first part is a bit more general. So bear with me, it will be there, we will talk about that, and I hope that our discussion can be geared, can be targeted to the digital aspect of communities. So community, the word, as so many words, is from the Latin communio, which means fellowship, with the aspect of mutual participation, the aspect of sharing. It is actually two small words from Latin, come together with, and then munus, gift. Of course, in the Christian world, the word community is especially associated with the Eucharist, the communion service that we have in the Protestant world. In Greek, there is also an important word, koinonia, communication by intimate participation. That is the same as the Latin word communio, but I would like to note that there are actually two words, communio and societas in Latin, but community is more what we are looking for, this intimate association, participation. In German, you have some similar difference between two words. You have the Gesellschaft, the society, but then you have the Gemeinschaft, doing things together in a community. So the word community in our English language can, of course, mean lots of different things. We have geographic communities, neighborhood, suburbs, villages, towns, even larger regions. These are communities. We have communities of culture, ethnic communities, special needs communities, religious communities, of course. And then the word is also used in the area of biology, interacting living organisms in a given environment are sometimes referred to as a community. And then today we talk in particular about virtual communities, as we have a virtual community right at this moment. And then we know that some of these things may be overlapping. Religious community, virtual community, that is what we have this morning, or rather this evening here in the Netherlands. A special kind of community is a faith community. And I would like to define that as follows. A group of people who share the same particular set of religious beliefs and are joined together by particular forms of worship, usually gathering in a specific place of worship. That is what covers, in most cases, what a faith community is. Sharing the same particular set of religious beliefs, at least to a large extent, joined together by a particular form of worship, and then meeting in whatever form and at whatever place, a faith community. Now, is that the same as a church? If so, are we talking about a local church, a congregation? Are we talking about a national church or a worldwide church? Do we use the word faith community or church as a synonym for denomination? And then, of course, there is the question, well, what is that church? Is there one visible church? Who is that visible church? Or is there also an invisible church, believers of this moment or of all ages? And I would like to think that there is an invisible church, God's people, throughout all ages and wherever we are in the world, and God knows his. But when we talk about faith community, we can talk about different things. I would like to talk in particular today about local communities. I think that is a very important kind of faith community. When you look at ecclesiology, that's the technical term, as most of you know, for the doctrine of the church, there is more and more in recent years the tendency to speak about the community aspect of the church. In Catholic circles, before Vatican II, the church spoke mostly of the universal church in terms of focusing on the institutional part of it. Whereas from Vatican II onwards, the church has been emphasizing the concept of people of God. Now, when I wrote a book a number of years ago on the doctrine of the church that was published by the Review and Herald, I wanted to give that book the title, The People of God. But then, publishers reserved the right to choose the title. And they did not like that title because they thought it was too Catholic. And so they wanted to call the book The Body of Christ. And that's what it was called. But I still regret that it could not be called The People of God, because for me, that is such an essential aspect of what we mean when we say church or when we talk about the faith community. We are the people of God. One of the important writers on ecclesiology, Van der Ven, he is, as you might suspect, a Dutchman. His book, however, appeared in the United States with Eerdmans, and he looked at the church from various aspects. The church, a local church or a national church, denomination. He also spoke about how the church would be different from a sect or a cult, and from the church as a club or an association. And then in most of his book emphasizes that the church really is a community of believers. That is the essence of what church is. Roman Catholic theologian Paul Miniar wrote an interesting book. It's an older book, published 1960, so that's already 65 years ago, but the book is still quoted in any book on ecclesiology, on the doctrine of the church. The book is called Images of the Church in the New Testament. And he identifies no fewer than 96 metaphors for the church. Some examples: family, brothers and sisters, the church as a pillar, church as a flock, as a fortress, as an army, and natuurlijk as a body, as the bride of Christ, as the temple with the cornerstone, Jesus Christ. So many different metaphors, but also many of these metaphors emphasize the aspect of community, of unity also in diversity. That is what a church is. It is a community, and it can be illustrated by many of these different metaphors. Another Catholic theologian, Dulles, who his father, I believe, was a politician in the American politics. He was converted later in life, became a priest, and then even became a bishop, a cardinal. And he wrote this book, Models of the Church. Also an extremely valuable book where he looks at the church and says you can look at it from the perspective of different models: the church as a servant, the church as a herald that proclaims the message, the church as an institution. But then he also emphasizes that most of all, we should look at the church as a community, a mystical community, he calls it. It is something special that is difficult to exactly catch in words. Well, the New Testament talks about the church as a community, and maybe in no place that is clearer than right at the beginning when we see the church in Jerusalem, Acts 2, where we are told that they, that is the believers, devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to the communion, that is the breaking of bread and prayer. All the believers were together. In other words, they were really a community. They had everything in common. Selling their possessions and goods, they gave to anyone as he had need. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. Now, we recognize that the circumstances there were different. They were expecting the second coming of Christ to happen any moment. And so they demonstrated their sense of community, maybe not in the same way as we can do it today, but it's important to see how their gathering, how their relations were characterized by this sense of community. In the New Testament, we find this emphasis on the local character of the community. We're talking in the New Testament about the church in Rome, the church in Corinth, the church in Ephesus, the church in the region of Galatia. It is emphasis on this local character. The church is somewhere in a particular location. The New Testament also emphasizes the spiritual character rather than the institutional character of the church. It is all about the spiritual growth of the members, of the persons who belong to the body of Christ. In these descriptions of the New Testament community, faith celebrations play an important role. The Eucharist, baptism, and that is a point I want to return to later and see how this can be part of a virtual community, these celebrations that are so important for the church as a community of Christ. And we, I think, are interested to see in the New Testament how there is this open character. People are invited to become members of the church, whether they are Jews or Gentiles, whether they are free or slaves. There is this open character, this inclusiveness, although, of course, that was not without its challenges, as we find in particular in the letters of the New Testament. But these are some of the things that the New Testament emphasizes when it comes to the church as a community. As I said, the emphasis is not primarily on organization or doctrine. Yes, some kind of primitive organization was soon being formed. And of course, doctrines were not unimportant, but the emphasis is consistently on the people, the members of the body of Christ. Very clearly, there is an emphasis on the priesthood of the believers rather than on the clergy or the hierarchy. The mission presupposes some degree of organization, but there is little or no evidence in the New Testament yet of emphasis on the institution. There is, of course, much about the mission of the church, particularly in the book of Acts, but also in the letters to the various churches. But it is not so much that the members are encouraged to, in evangelistic campaigns, or to go from door to door, or distribute the great controversy, but the mission of the believers is a faith that is lived, and through their faith, through their way of life, they will attract and inspire others. And that is the way the church is supposed to grow. The Seventh-day Adventist community. I believe that Adventists must, to a large extent, yet learn how to be a community. We hear also our leaders say all the time that the local community is important. But it is not always clear from the way the church operates that that is what is really the case. The church must show, and it must also become clear in the status of the clergy or where the money of the church is being used. It must show that the local community is all important. Church as a community and also part of the community in which it is present. Where the church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, has yet, unfortunately, a long way to go, that it is a truly inclusive community in which everybody is welcome, where there are no differences in the way we treat genders or sexual orientation or social status or whatever. And maybe this is also a point that can come back in the discussion. There is this question, how can there be a genuinely lived communion between higher organizations and the local church? It almost seems from time to time that they are in a relationship of competition rather than being part of one community. A true community is characterized by a process of deep respect and true listening for the needs of the people in the community and in those around the faith community. And the question is, of course, for every local community and also for the church at large, to what extent we demonstrate this characteristic of true community. process of deep respect for each other, for other opinions, and the possibility to do some true listening for what the people think and what they need, both in the community itself and as it serves and relates to the community around it. What are communities and faith communities for? Well, for a different number, for a number of things. Meeting social needs. Sometimes you need smaller groups in order to really meet those social needs. But it's not just the social needs that a faith community is for. It's also liturgical needs, worship needs, hearing the word together, singing together, praying together. Faith communities are supposed to give moral guidance and be involved in missional initiatives of whatever kind. So faith communities have a number of important roles. When we look at a little closer at Adventist communities, we have unfortunately seen in the history of our church a development from what we might call a movement to a more institutionalized church. And that is, I think, unfortunate, and the element of community has severely suffered as a result. I believe we need a shift in focus from the vertical to the horizontal. And that is what a community can bring about. Surely the horizontal is important, maybe even primary, but there also must be this horizontal connection between the members of the group at whatever level and between the members and the publics that they want to serve. Too much emphasis, unfortunately, institutionalism, hierarchy, in spite of denying that we have a hierarchy that is clearly there, the emphasis on globalism, uniformity of doctrine, uniformity of policies, ever more detailed policies, emphasis on methods that must be used worldwide. That is not the way to nurture the sense of local communities. And that is the challenge, how to allow for and to stimulate more plurality, diversity, inclusivity in the local communities of the denomination. Why should we emphasize local communities? Because the biblical mandate, I believe, suggests it. It is the model that is demonstrated by the apostles, as we find in the book of Acts and the Pauline letters. And I'm always inspired by the first 3 chapters of the book of Revelation, in particular in Revelation 1, where Christ is walking in this vision that John has between the candles, the 7 candles, and these candles are 7 churches in Asia Minor, named from Ephesus to Laodicea. Christ is there between the local churches, and he has the leaders of the local churches in his hands. And so that suggests a model that we sometimes fail to implement. We are talking a lot about church growth, and in particular in the Western world. I think we can only be a growing church, continue to be a growing church, as local communities grow. And that local church should not be primarily numerical growth. And we must keep in mind, I believe, that the local church is, in fact, the whole church, since it has the whole Christ. The whole church is the whole church in a specific place. That is what we should keep in mind when we talk about the local community. Ratzinger, the Pope Benedict, I should say the previous Pope, but I can no longer say the previous Pope, but the Pope before the previous Pope, Ratzinger, he once wrote, for the early Christians, the first and predominant meaning of the word church was the local church. The local churches were not administrative centers of a large organization. They were the living cells, in each of which the whole mystery of the one body of Christ was present, so that each was simply called ecclesia, church. Now, maybe you don't like to hear it from a Catholic, and maybe you can you don't mind having another voice, but basically that voice says the same. I'm quoting from Jan Paulsen from his book, Where Are We Going?, where he says we must raise serious questions about our congregations. What is the dominant atmosphere of the place where we meet and worship with our fellow believers? Does our faith community reflect Ellen White's description of the church as the theater of his grace? Or does it more closely resemble a soap opera of human nature? Does our church have the warmth of a family kitchen, or does it feel more like a clinic or a laboratory? Well, those are serious questions, and I leave it up to you to answer it. Well, what is then the approach that we should take? How do we establish, nurture real communities? I'm afraid that it needs a new kind of church leadership than we have at present. A kind of leadership that will allow for regional and local initiatives and will facilitate that, not prescribe universal missional methods. We need a kind of leadership that emphasizes spiritual nurture rather than doctrinal university, and one that creates, participates in an open, welcoming atmosphere for our communities. Well, whether we're going to have that anytime soon, but that is, I believe, essential for nurturing real Christian Adventist communities. It does not come by itself, as I said in the beginning. It needs some attention at all levels in the church. All we need is love. The variation on a theme of a well-known song. Love is the element that cements a community. Unfortunately, we see that the frequent reality in many of our local churches and at other levels is not love, but even aggression, at least a judgmental attitude, intolerance, and even hostility. Love is needed rather than the sense that we need an enemy to fight against. It does not mean that we have to like everybody. That is, I fear, impossible. But Christian love is the bridge that we need to deal with disagreements, to deal with problems. Love in the sense of deep respect for each other. As I mentioned earlier, that is one of the characteristics of being a true community, a deep respect for one another. Now, as I promised, let's come to the digital aspect of the community. We have had, well, it is in many ways something that is rather new for the Christian world and also, of course, for Adventism. We have had some early experiments in maybe the last 10, 15 years, but we have really come to grips with digital communities in the time of the COVID pandemic. It is providing a great service for people with mobility issues, people who cannot attend a physical church gathering, and it is great that they can, in their living room, then participate in a church service. It is also a great service to isolated members. And even in the Western world, there are many areas without local churches anywhere near. And for those members that are isolated, it is a great service, a great opportunity to meet with other members in a virtual community. And indeed, as I have mentioned it before in an article for Adventist Today, digital communities can serve as a city of refuge. There are those of us who have been caught in a toxic church environment where the atmosphere is such that it does not really help you in your spiritual life. In fact, it's very difficult to cope with it. It's an environment where you do not want to be. For those who are caught in such a local toxic environment, the virtual community, the Zoom service may be a city of refuge. And many who are what I call at the margins of the church, who are still trying to maintain a relationship with the church, but have found that there are things in the church that they cannot live with. Some of the issues that have not been solved in the church, and some of the doctrinal details that they cannot live with. For many of those members on the margins of the church, this type of meeting together in a virtual environment can be a city of refuge. And I think there are even some ex-members who still have enough of a relationship with the church that they want to belong to some community where they find many people who have the same background and who share many of the same ideas. So the digital community became more important during the COVID pandemic and now has a real staying place in the religious landscape and certainly also in the Adventist landscape. I do have, however, some questions, and I hope that some of you will be able to give answers to these questions, or at least that we can discuss these things, because I feel they are important. If a digital community, that is, I think, a vital question. If it is a church, as many of you would maintain, as I would also maintain myself, then the question is, of course, how do you enter that church? Usually you enter a church by baptism. Now, many of you who are in this community have been baptized at some time in the past. But if there are new people joining this community who have not been baptized, is that something that we should, in some way or another, be able to offer to people who want to become members of this digital community? I continue to believe that participating regularly in the Lord's Supper is an important spiritual experience. Now, is there a digital forum for the Lord's Supper? I know there have been some experiments during the COVID period. I'm not aware of continuing experiments along these lines, but is this something that we should think about when we consider such a community as this, other similar communities, when we see them as a church? I believe it's also important that in a community, members are able to support each other. Now, how can we make sure that when you belong to a digital community like ATSS, that there is sufficient support for members, that we learn about the needs, the issues that members live with? How can we be more meaningful in giving support to one another? Another question, how can giving become a regular part of a digital community? Now, of course, it is important to support the organization that offers the digital community. In this case, to support Adventists today. And I hope, and it's good to see that many of you are doing so. But a church does also give in a different way. And how do we make that part of a digital community? And how does witnessing maybe also become part of the community experience? Now, these are some of the questions that I have when I look at the digital community as our church, part of the church. And I have some more questions. Can the digital community be a solution where no suitable local church is available? Can the digital Sabbath school in many cases be a good alternative for the normal Sabbath school? If I'm honest, I often fear to go to a normal Sabbath school when I'm going to preach somewhere, and just fear that I get involved in discussions that I really don't want to get involved in. Maybe if people still want to have a digital church, a normal church service, a normal worship service, they may want to avoid the kind of Sabbath school that their church has and attend a digital Sabbath school. Maybe some of the larger churches should think about at least offering that in addition to their normal Sabbath school. The question is, however, and that is the question I think that all the organizations that presently offer a digital Sabbath school should ask, and is, should we maybe focus more on real and systematic Bible study in these digital Sabbath schools? And another question, and I know it's easier to ask questions than to answer all the questions, is should it be maybe advisable to have some of these digital meetings at a different time so that they do not compete time-wise with regular church services? Well, I don't know what you think of these questions, but maybe some of these things can come back in the discussion. Having said this, and having asked these questions, then I think it's important to emphasize that God's Spirit is omnipresent, can be anywhere, is also present in cyberspace, and not only in a building on Sabbath morning where an Adventist community gathers. God's Spirit is also here in this ATSS that we are at present, at this moment, participating in. It is a fact that we should underline, that cannot be denied, that it proves to be a blessing for many that we have this kind of digital communities. And many of you who are participating today have said that it is a blessing for you. And some, maybe many, have said and are saying, this is now my church. The question is this in addition to physical meetings, or is it replacing physical meetings? And I think for some, it is a replacement, and we should be happy that that replacement is available. Question is, that is maybe the overall question, how can we strengthen the community aspect in our digital communities? And with this last question, I want to end my presentation and give it back to Björn.
Thank you, Reinder, for a really stimulating presentation there. I'm sure a lot of us have loads of questions, and I'm starting to see hands, which is great. I'm going to take advantage of being the moderator to ask the first one, because this one actually really concerns me. And before I get into it, again, thank you, everyone. Reinder alluded to it, but your support for this, for ATSS, is always very appreciated, especially right now during our spring fundraiser. So I will post the link. This is the last week of the fundraiser, so please do support, especially as this is a troubled economy and we need all the support we can get. Thank you, guys. So Reinder, what I'm concerned, because my daughter, she's 9 years old, and she already is a bit bored by church. And I honestly can't blame her, because seen through her eyes, I mean, I love the community. I love church. This is Newbold Church. It kind of ideologically aligns with me. But I realize that pretty much only the children's story is geared towards her. Do you see forms of community emerging that are more interesting to children or to younger generations? Do you see more of that nowadays or less of that? And how can we interest our kids more? Because if we don't do that, we don't have much of a future in any form of community.
Well, I'm sometimes a bit embarrassed that many people seem to think that I'm so well acquainted with the world church that I know of all these developments and able to give answers to these various questions. Not too long ago, I presented in the Faith and Reason Sabbath School.
Yes.
And, that's also one of the, I think, more prominent virtual Sabbath schools in the United States. And the moderator at one point said, well, I see, when I look at the screens, I see no one younger than 65 years old.
Yikes.
And that really hit me. And I don't know whether there are any or many people. I see some who are certainly younger than 65, but by and large, what I have seen and groups that I have participated in, we have an older section of the church, and so I don't know whether we could do anything for children or have a form that would also interest children. But Björn, I think you asked a very pertinent question, and that is, without any doubt, the age group to which most of us belong must also receive nurture. And often we don't find that in the local churches that we have been attending. And we often talk about the younger people who have doubts, but many of us who are a little bit more advanced in life, we have also become not so sure about some things and have questions, and often questions that are not being answered. So it's important that we have forums like this where we can meet. But it is concerning that the average age, I think, is also quite high in this particular group. So, Lauren, how are we going to solve that?
Well, good thing we have Lauren next in the queue. He can answer that question that Reinder is posing him. But yeah, well, thank you for that answer, Reinder. I appreciate the honesty, and I don't think anyone has a quick answer to that question specifically. I had a friend in Korea who started a children's church. It was an actual congregation. I think it was part of his job. That was an interesting potential solution. Lauren, you were next in the queue. I don't know. Did you go somewhere, or are you still here?
Oh, no, I'm still here.
Oh, okay, cool. All right.
Yeah. No, the question that Bjorn raises is not I'm sorry, that Reinder raised about seeing all these gray-haired people is not confined to digital churches, Reinder. I have been pastor of many different kinds of churches in my time, and in the last 20 years, the proportion of older people in church has steadily increased. The proportion of younger people in churches has gone down. And we tried various things. At the end of my career, because I didn't want to move, but I wanted to change, I took on a district that was rather large. I had, over that time, Reinder, 6 different churches. Some came and some went, and they reorganized, but 6 over I don't know, about a 5-year period that I was pastor there. As of right now, 3 of those 6 are closed, and I would say the 2 others are probably going to be closing. I don't expect them to last longer than 5 years. If one of them survives more than 10 years, I'm going to be shocked and amazed. This is just the nature of church now. This is an awful thing to say, but the truth of the matter is, if I lived in those communities where I pastored at this time, I would be very hard put to attend church there. They're very Trumpy oriented. They're they're just not healthy communities, really, I don't think. But I want to make mention of something that you alluded to, and that is, where is the center of gravity for a Seventh-day Adventist in the church? And this is an interesting little psychological dynamic that I noted when I was pastoring small churches, and even to a certain extent in the big churches. And that is that people realized that their local community was not very dynamic or interesting. They knew that. They knew that the potluck meals were not that great. They knew that the basement stunk of mold. They knew that the place was worn down. They knew that the lay people who who occasionally had to deliver the sermon because I was driving all over the place. They knew that those sermons weren't all that great. Sometimes they played Doug Batchelor sermons when I was gone. But the fact is that the interesting little psychological dynamic that I noticed was that they would say, in effect, yeah, we know this isn't great, but we're part of the general conference. We're part of the Columbia Union. So we're part of something much bigger. And so we have to keep giving. We have to keep uh, supporting the church because we're part of this big thing. And so I always felt that for these little churches, the center of gravity wasn't local. The center of gravity was in Silver Spring or Columbia, Maryland, or even in the Ohio Conference. It was somewhere else. We are just a little speck off the edge of this. Um, so I think that's still true. I think it's true for a lot of Adventists. We're part of the big Adventist church, and all this bragging about 22 millions, and sometimes they'll even say, well, actually, it's 25 million. We don't even know how many millions of people we have. And look at the big rally we had in South America, and look at the huge evangelistic meetings in New Guinea. It's so big, and oh yeah, it's kind of crummy here at home. Yeah, there's not much going on. We're a little tiny, we're a few old people, but look at what we're part of. And I think that's an interesting dynamic. And I know you kind of said it shouldn't be that way, but wow, if I go across the Ohio Conference, I would say 95% of the churches would feel that way. It's essential for them.
Are you sure that that is still the case to the extent that it was in the past? Because from what I see in many places is that there is much less of a sense that the division is important, the general conference is important. In fact, for many, it's becoming totally irrelevant what they either do in the division office or in the general conference. Now, the circumstances are probably different from place to place. And I also see in Europe that sentiment of belonging to something bigger, general conference, etc., is stronger in the immigrant communities than it is in among the, let's say, indigenous.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, and I recognize the fact that, there are communities where when you go preach there and you see the people and you listen to the people and you think, now, would I come here every week faithfully if I were living in this neighborhood? Now, this morning, I preached in a small church not far away from where I live. And that church, on the average, has maybe 15 people attending. Now, it is actually a nice community. You do sense that it is a community where people care for each other. But there has been a process where they have lost 2/3 of the members who wanted something else, who wanted to talk about the prophecies and who wanted to talk about things that these people who are still there are not interested in.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes maybe also sometimes at a cost to become a community and stay a community. Now, whether that is something that can be avoided, that cost has to be paid, I don't know. The picture is quite diverse from place to place, but
Yeah, I'm describing a particular set of small city
yeah,
and rural churches,
yeah.
and that makes up about 90.
Mhm.
Well, yeah, a place like Ohio, basically five churches make up 50% of the membership and 50% of the tithe, or even more, maybe 2/3 of the tithe. Places like Kettering, but there's 100 churches there. So
Mhm.
you got 95 churches. They're barely sputtering along. And they do their way. Some of them are very isolated. And this is a certain set of people. And yes, these are not, if I go to Glendale City Church, yeah, they don't care who the division, yeah, a lot of them couldn't tell you who the division president is. But out there, they've got to be part of something bigger. It's not worth continuing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, interesting exchange there, and thanks, Reinder, for the response as well. We'll continue the discussion, and I'm going to routinely make my my plea for more hands. So this being one of those moments. So please do put up your hand for questions. Leland is next in the queue, and I think you have unmuted already. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the opportunity, and this is an interesting field of discussion from my perspective, as Lauren knows. I am wondering, Reinder, how you would place the one another text. There's 60 plus in the New Testament, in helping or guiding the theological understanding of ecclesia.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah. How should we as Christians primarily, secondly, some of us are theologians by training, how should we place, what emphasis should be placed? What role should these 60 plus one another text, allelum, the Greek, how should they form our understanding of the modern conception of ecclesia?
Okay. Well, I'm not sure that I can give a very tailored answer to that question, except that the whole idea of being there for one another reverberates with the idea that we are brothers and sisters and that we are family, and then have this responsibility towards one another. And isn't that what we are talking about? Community, being there for one another, and not just being there for ourselves and for our own benefit, even if it is a spiritual benefit. Isn't that what the essence of the ecclesia is?
Well, it seems to me, from my study into this issue for some years now, that we can't truly answer the question of ecclesia without looking at those 60 separate examples of the way the community actually expresses itself when people are gathered together. To refer briefly to the idea of a digital ecclesia, I think it's an impossibility. I think we in our modern era are infatuated with these media, and they are very useful for what's happening in this meeting. But I would never call this meeting an ecclesia. It doesn't have the potential for allowing people to actually interact, to actually love, to actually encourage, to actually do all of the things that are described in the New Testament when we look at those one another texts.
Okay.
It's extremely narrowly defined by the discussion, by dialogue, by these elements that lend themselves to this kind of medium. But I think, for example, let me widen the scope a little bit. In my study of the New Testament, preaching doesn't exist in the ecclesia of the New Testament. It's not there. Also, what isn't there is what to me is one of the defining elements for too many Christians, in my view, that worship, congregational worship, is supposed to be central. And it doesn't exist in the New Testament. It's not there. So how can we skip over these fundamental issues and believe that we're going to create a vibrant, growing ecclesia of Christ on earth?
Well, when you say that a digital gathering like this one does not qualify for a church, then, before ending my presentation, I had a number of questions myself about some of these things that cannot happen or are insufficiently happening in a gathering like this. Whether or not there wasn't any preaching, and whether there wasn't a worship service, I think that that is too strong a statement. There must have been a considerable amount of preaching on the part of the apostles for the church to grow, for people to be convinced. And there is evidence, I think, that people gathered for prayer and that people did have worship. But bringing it back to the present in our situation, and see what church has become, it certainly is not ideal, and it probably is too institutional, and we have added all kinds of things to how we do church that are more traditional than they are biblical, yes. But the church does help many people in their spiritual existence, and for many people, it is meaningful to gather on Sabbath. In a digital environment, some things are not possible, but for many people, that is, and that is also the experience of many, it is something that is important for their spiritual life. So the church services in the physical sense in many places leave much to be deserved. The digital services may not have everything that we would like them to have, because simply that is technically not possible. But still, they at least that's my opinion, they have a place. And I like that term, city of refuge, that it does give people a place where they have some sense of community. But I wonder how we can strengthen that sense, and how we can remedy some of the things that the digital community does not have. Well, I don't know whether I'm really answering your questions satisfactorily, but these are difficult things that you bring up.
Yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate this discussion. I appreciate the opportunity to raise some of these issues. It is a bit, what's the best word to use? Surprising, in a sense, that in a group like this, where our heritage has been, and most of us, at least speaking for my experience here in Western North America, growing up from cradle to grave in Adventist education, from grade school through high school, college, Andrews University. We seem hesitant to actually genuinely challenge what parts of our Christian experience have been totally conditioned by tradition, how that constrains us from actually looking and following the New Testament guidelines that are actually relatively clear, about these things. I was just downstairs and looking in my library the other day, and there are books that I was taught to study from in Pacific Union College and at Andrews that talk about worship and that talk about church and preaching, and none of them not one of them deals with the impact of the allelum, the one another. Because when a body gathers, if it doesn't actually interact as a body, is it a body? You can go in.
Thank you very much.
All right.
This is actually one of my favorite things about ATSS, the back and forth. I've been to churches where conversation is very much one way, or you can only frame things a certain way. And so I agree. I like it when we have different opinions. So thank you for both perspectives there. I think we'll move on to Linda, and thank you for the hands that are raising. Linda, I think you've unmuted. Go for it.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Reiner. This is very interesting. Yesterday, I watched the Academy Award winning movie Conclave, and today I was able to watch some of the Pope's funeral. I was just blown away by the love for this particular Pope. Bjorn, you asked a question about young people. There were so many young people. A lot of people came from all over the world to attend this past week. I don't know how many got into the funeral today, but there are so many young people, teenagers, 20-somethings, that absolutely are not even thinking about leaving the Catholic Church. I'm not a Catholic. I used to be a long time ago, but I was just blown away because I've never been to Italy. Would love to go. I love pomp and ceremony. That circumstance. I love that kind of stuff. I love the wedding of William and Kate, but I was just blown away by the love and the dignity. And I don't believe the same way as Catholics, their theology. But they seem to be retaining their young people. And I was just blown away by the conclave, and I had to Google on when they would be holding the conclave for this Pope, and they said sometime in early May. But Dr. Reiner, how do you think that the Catholic Church is retaining their young people, and they're getting young all the time, and they're not going anywhere, and maybe some Adventist churches are losing theirs? Thank you very much.
Well, I'm not totally sure that we can say that the Catholic Church is retaining its young people. We should not forget that there are, I think, 1.4 billion Catholics around the world. And there is indeed a large group of young people that is mobilized, and it's interesting to see how this Pope was popular also with young people. That sometimes inspires me a little bit to know that even if you're old, you can still be popular with young people. But anyway, it is true that there is a group of Catholic young people that is enthusiastic for their church, stays with that church, but whether it's a large percentage, I rather doubt. Now, on the other hand, just this Easter.
Not a problem they want to solve.
No.
It's just a problem they want to talk.
All right, I'm trying to find where I'm hearing this from.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry.
just this Easter, in the newspaper that I subscribe to, it was mentioned that the Catholic Church in the Netherlands says that there have never been so many baptisms as there were at Easter time. And these are people who have, not infant baptism, but people who have come to faith, have had some instruction, and are now being baptized. And usually that is done at Easter. Now, how many were this absolute success that they had? About 500 for the whole country. Now, they see that as success, and maybe I can see that, where numbers are declining, that would be a success. But it's not as if the Catholic Church is retaining a large number of their young people. We are in the Adventist Church also seeing that there are places where there are significant segments of young people. You take the organization, the GYC, that is quite popular. They have large congresses. They have a huge digital presence. That is a significant group that apparently also within Adventism is staying with the church. It must be said that many of the young people that are staying with the church nowadays are quite conservative. Now, whether that is a good thing or not so good thing, that is, of course, something that is debatable. But to say that the Catholic Church is retaining its young people, I don't think that is actually, when you look at the total picture, that is actually a fact.
Thank you, Reinder. Yeah, I wonder if, like, for example, at the GC session, I'm sure we'll see a lot of young people too this summer, but whether that's representational of a growing young base is a different question. But great question and point. Ray and Bobby are next, and I think they've unmuted.
A lot of questions and thoughts and ideas. The fact that we're sitting here in a digital age and talking to everybody on a World Wide Web, we should stop and think of where we're at and how we've progressed over time. But yet, when it comes to this idea of church, have we really progressed? We keep referring to old ideas and concepts. Have we ever discussed in depth what it really means to be a church, or what the word church means, or how it's changed or should it change to understand what's going on? When you talk about young people, I mean, that question's been going on for how many decades? And people keep coming up with new ideas and new ideas from the .org, but nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. I would suggest that the younger generation, whatever that means, most often it means to the person saying it's somebody younger than them. But it's a broad group. I think their lives are just quite busy surviving in the world today, which is a lot different than the majority of us here. And when they look around and see what church means to the older generation, they simply see nothing in that for them. Why is that? You have to ask them, but you have to listen to them. And when the church does surveys, you don't just do surveys of the members. That isn't going to give you any information. You've got to reach out and talk to people who are not coming. And of course, those surveys are not designed for that. But for adults to sit around and talk about, well, the church should be doing this, or the church should be this or that, I think the real question is, everything else has changed in the world. Why is it we can't review and say, what should church be, whatever that means, in this modern world? What should it mean today? Not what it meant thousands of years ago. So much of our theology goes back thousands of years, and yet we talk about here on A Today about bringing it more up to date. Then perhaps we need to look at what church means today and get rid of the old definitions. Think of something new. You know, Bjorn's of the younger generation. Maybe the ideas and the thoughts of people like him and others of that age group are the ones that should really be listened to.
Mhm.
Anyway, my comments.
Maybe ask your daughter, Bjorn, what she would like for church to be. A thought.
Yeah, she has told me at 9 years old, she told me, she's like, Daddy, church is not kid friendly.
Mhm.
Well,
And
it's not friendly for a lot of people.
yeah. And it's something that I struggle with for sure. But anyway, the question is not for me, it's for Reinder.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the questions are all for me. But I really don't have an answer for you, Bob. Yes, church must develop over time to go with the questions that people ask. The church must be relevant. And we can ask the question, how relevant is the church to us? Sometimes I feel the church is relevant for my life, but many times I feel it isn't really. And that probably is the most important issue, that many of the younger generation do not feel that church, Adventist church in particular, is dealing with the things that are important for them. It is, I think, for many, just too dogmatic, a long list of things that you have to believe that really do not mean much on Monday or Tuesday when you are at work or when you are with your family. So how to make religion relevant, how to make the Adventist church relevant, that can only start locally. You cannot expect that to start from a body like the General Conference. Unless something radically changes in the type of leadership that we have, such a body will be intent on keeping what is there, on not risking major change. Real change can only happen, I think, locally, maybe a little bit regionally. It is risky because you never know how it will turn out. But I think it's worth the risk, because what you just said is that it has always been a problem for young people to relate to church. Maybe so, but it is much more the case today. And even I was always under the impression, for instance, that in a continent like South America, we were keeping our young people a lot better than we were in Europe. But I found out that recently that, in fact, in the last decade or so, the number of young people there joining the church was smaller than the number of young people leaving the church. And but of course, often we are not willing to actually listen to the facts and just try to hope that things will somehow improve. But in most of the churches, and I don't know how many of you go out preaching, but when I go out almost every Sabbath, I find very few young people in the churches where I go to. And that's disconcerting. The church will die with us if there is no change, at least in the Western world, and at least in those churches which have mostly the indigenous people of the countries that, and I'm not talking about the immigrant sections, which is large in some of the countries that we represent.
Very disconcerting indeed. Yeah, a lot of food for thought there. Dr. Sidney Freeman, my friend, who's unmuted, which is nice to see. And the last time, well, one of the recent times we interacted, Sidney had just held up an Adventist Today shirt in Antarctica and taken a picture that we posted on social media. So I don't know if your question's about anything to do with that, but thank you for doing that for us. Over to Sidney.
Thank you. And Dr. Reinder, thank you so much for your presentation. So the core of my question is, do we as Adventists put too much weight and expectations on our local congregation? I ask that question as someone who is third generation Adventist, both on my grandmother's side, or paternally and maternally, right? And so I pre-K through college Adventist education. When I was growing up, my friend group was Adventist. All my social things were Adventist. My education was everything centered around Adventism. Whereas now, having access to different groups. So let's say, for instance, community service, Adventist community service. I used to volunteer with them, but in Moscow, Idaho, where I live, I was invited to serve on the board of the United Way, and our impact was actually much larger than our Adventist community services department at my local congregation. Let's say I wanted to enhance my public speaking and speak. Well, yes, I can speak as an elder at my local church, but I now have Toastmasters in which I am speaking on a regular basis. So, and then, I had CrossFit as another outlet. And so in the past, we kind of, all of our friend group, our social groups, our spirituality all came from a local congregation. And now we can, if I'm not getting, I'm not feeling like I'm growing from Sabbath school at my local congregation, I can be with Adventist Today and get that. And so I just wanted to lay that as context for my question there.
Yeah. Well, you started your question with, do we not place too much emphasis on the local congregation? I would say the answer is no. We cannot place too much emphasis on what happens locally. The danger is that we place too much emphasis on what we expect to come from higher up. The services from higher up can be useful. They should be useful, but it must, if something is going to happen, it must happen locally. But I think you are pointing to something that can enhance and enrich the life of at least small local churches in doing something together with other Christians and non-Christians, other things in the community. And that is something that is often seen as a danger rather than as an enrichment. But for many smaller churches, there are opportunities. And for individuals in these smaller churches, there are opportunities that we shy away from very often rather than using them. But that is, of course, also has to do with the fact, how do we look at other Christians, and are the people that belong to other denominations, other groups, are they competitors, or do we have many goals in common? But it must happen locally, I think.
Thank you very much. Interesting question. Sometimes I feel that all Adventists should have their local Adventist church plus a Sunday church they go to, just to kind of get the best of both worlds. Dana, you're next, and I think you're unmuted.
Many people do, actually, and some. That is something that I feel is also useful when you have couples. One belongs to one church, other belongs to the other church. Why not attend both and get the best of two?
Exactly.
That's an excellent idea. And, I know this is all the way out there, but how about we host some Sunday services for other people to come to us? Anyway, this was not what I wanted to say. I wanted to start with a joke telling you that I take great offense at the comment that says that everybody is over 65 in this group, because I think that at least you are not, Going back to the issue of young people, and somebody made a comment that young people are leaving the church without talking with anyone. I think they talk, but maybe the people that make decisions are not the people that are listening. I will share something very personal. My daughter is 19, and when she was about 13 years old, she chose to go to a very traditional church because of friends. So she wanted to have a community of people of her age. In a year or so, she told me that's a cult, not a Christian church. And she stopped going, and it was heartbreaking. She likes other churches. But when we make young people choose between theology and community, that creates a problem, that creates a tension that might draw them out of the church. Going back to the comment regarding people in very traditional countries, young people in traditional countries staying in church, I can tell you, because I grew up in a traditional country, I grew up in Romania, and I can tell you that for a long time, many young people stayed in church because of fear. And that's not really quality Adventism or quality Christianity. We want people to stay because they are passionate about faith, not because they are afraid of God or they are afraid of being shunned by the community. And finally, I want to share an experience about online church. So as I told you, I grew up in Romania. I had for 17 years, the moment I started university, I had the same Sabbath school group. We were all in the beginning of our university studies. We grew together as professionals. Many of us went on to have PhDs, and then I moved to United States. And pandemic gave us the opportunity to have our Sabbath school together again. And we are still going strong. We were in 3 different continents. We are still going strong 5 years later. We started in 2020. We have Sabbath school Friday night, and it's a wonderful community. But that took me to Leland's comment that an online community is not really a church. My Friday night Sabbath school, it's really a church because we have personal relationships. So that might be the question for Dr. Bruinsma. how can online communities become real churches? What does it take? How can we build the personal type of relationship, support that would make our A-to-day, for example, gathering truly a community? Thank you.
Those are many questions. And you started with a question and saying, why can't we have Sunday services? Well, I wondered, for instance, when we have Easter, why we cannot have an Easter service on Sunday morning. But that's a different kind of topic. I feel awkward when I have to tell my neighbors that we have our Easter service on Saturday rather than on Sunday morning when the whole world celebrates Easter. But that's a different story. However, it does raise the point as to whether maybe some of our digital activities could be at different times. I mentioned that maybe not at the same time when we have physical church services. And also, for instance, as you mentioned, you have your group meeting on a Friday evening. Now, would it be possible? I don't know, but would we attract people of different age groups also if we had some of these digital meetings at different times? It has often been suggested that young people don't like to come in the weekend to a church service because it's at an awkward time for them. I don't know, maybe we need to look at timing. I don't know whether we can devise some kind of support system by a newsletter of another way of smaller subgroups to intensify the personal contact between members of a group like this. But yes, in order to qualify as a church, as a community, we need to look at ways of making it possible for people to get to know one another. Now, in reality, when you have a church of 100 or 200 people, and I see we have now at this moment 103 computers participating, so that's probably about 150 people. If you were meeting in a building, you would not know all the other people. You would not have a close relationship with all people. That's also the reality. But maybe it is possible to devise some system that a group like this one becomes more of a community. Well, what else did you mention? And an important point that you mentioned is that the competition between theology and community. In Adventism, theology seems to often win from community. And while both are important, and you cannot have a church without some kind of theology, yet at the same time, belonging comes before believing, as Richard Rice wrote in his book. That is the reality of today, that people want to belong, they want to be part of a community, and in the setting of the community, they will talk about doctrine, and they will find their way into finding out more about who God is and what he does, etc., etc. But we confront our young people with the fact that here are 28 fundamental beliefs. Take it or just that's it, the package, and that does not work in today's world.
Well said. Thank you very much, Reinder. Yeah. I've been happy in recent years. At my local church, there's a group of for example, a family of Hong Kongers who sort of fled Hong Kong with the political problems, and they're evangelical Christians, and just wanted a church community that was similar to what they had at home, and they found it at Newbold, and so they go, and I don't think they have any desire to be Adventists, but they just like worshiping with Adventists. That's what I would hope. We offer more and more, at least in this part of the world. George, you are next.
Yes, thank you for another gem, another great theme that you are sharing, Reinder. I'm thinking about the issue. Well, first, online works for a certain population. I was thinking, actually, after Leland mentioned that, I was thinking, how would it be if I had small children, if I were now a younger guy, in my 20s or 30s with small children, what to do to instill in them the desire to belong to a church. So it's a complicated thing. Online works for me very well. I go to the E14 class on Friday afternoon for me here. I come to this, to Faith and Reason. But in order to bring, the young kids, there is a need to have a community. Now, our communities, Adventist communities, are failing completely, I guess, or is obvious. And not long ago, a retired pastor, Adventist pastor, contacted me, and we talked, and he is actually attending now an Anglican church. And I found it interesting. But a couple of months ago, I asked him, how is it going there? And he was so excited. So I went online, and I have been following the church for about 2 months now. And it is the Falls Church Anglican. It's in what's the state? I forgot now. So, and I was surprised, because usually when we go and see those programs in churches, there are 20 people attending or so. That church is full, is packed. They have 2 services, one more conservative at the 10 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, and at 11, a little bit more progressive, no extreme. The music is moderate, it's nothing wild, it's great. And I was curious, what is keeping that church full? I think that I figured out is the preaching. The preaching is so Christ-centered, is so biblically focused, that it really produces the fruits of the Christian approach. And again, I was surprised. It's full, but the preaching is superb. There's no prophets being quoted, modern prophets, of course. There's no quote of anything. It's Christ and his ministry and all that, and salvation, the plan of salvation, the gospel and all that. Why now, Reinder? What would it be, in your opinion, a motivator, the main motivator for an Adventist church to retain its youth and to bring new people to a church? There must be a motivator. The second coming is no longer. 1844 was for a few years, that was that thing. Then came Christ is coming back. So that was this announcing and this thing that now 200 years later, well, it's not working very well as a motivator. What should be a motivator now for the Adventist church to be great again? If I can say that. Thanks for your presentation.
Well, the fact that this friend or person actually attends an Anglican church, I can understand that. I personally like that type of worship myself, and I miss that in many ways in our church. And I am sometimes on Sunday morning enjoying even a Catholic church service on television, because there are elements, not all, but there are elements that I really enjoy. And for me, the Adventist church service is often too meager when it comes to the worship elements. And someone once said, I go to church on Sabbath because it's the truth, and I go to church on Sunday because I want to worship. Well, of course, tastes different, preferences differ. Preaching is a very important aspect now, and you find that online services often, at least where I am, attract particular speakers more than other speakers, because people can pick and choose the kind of speaker that they listen to. Some of our university churches in the United States, large churches, of course, have very good speakers. And they can select their speakers in a different way from the way they are selected for the small local churches out in the country. So, yeah, preaching is important. But one thing that continues to be a problem for Seventh-day Adventists, that is that they meet on Sabbath. Most people don't like to go to church on a Saturday morning. They're not used to that. It sets them apart. In many places, still in Europe at least, as funny people, who goes to church on Saturday? Are you a Jew or whatever? Now, we don't want to give that up, obviously, because that is something that we believe in, that we want to worship, that we want to worship on Sabbath. But that is going to remain a hurdle, a practical hurdle. But when everything is said and done, I think churches in Europe, at least from my perspective, that have some growth are local churches that form a community, that are inclusive, where people feel welcome. Those are the churches that grow, not the churches that buy 10,000 copies of The Great Controversy and go distribute them somewhere. Those, yes, they get an article in the Adventist Review, but they are not the churches that are growing. The churches that are growing are healthy churches where people come and they want to stay, because it's the kind of community where they can feel well and can feel accepted. Now, if there is good preaching, that helps. And maybe we should pay more attention to the quality of the Sabbath services. But yeah, I can understand that people sometimes want to go and shop a little bit and get that experience that they do not get in their small local church.
So true, so true. The Sunday church I went to in Bangkok had a smoke machine, which was a huge plus, because you can, definitely we're not going to get that at Bangkok International Church. Ed, you are next, and I think that is the last hand that we have up. So unless we have another question, we will ask for a preview from Dr. Michael Schofield after Ed's question and Reinder's response. A preview on next week, Golden Age of Adventist Missions. Ed, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Reinder, I'm sorry I missed your presentation. I was actually teaching a Sabbath school class, and I'm driving home now. First of all, I want to say that I find the group of people that are on this call from week to week are a community for me. It's been surprising to me how much of a sense of community I've developed over the years. I have another community that I'd meet with on Sabbath, and it's also online, and that's Chuck Sandifer's Faith and Reason Sabbath School class. And I've developed a sense of community with both of those, interact with people offline. But that's just a statement. I wanted to ask you a question. The Adventist Church is really bad at innovation. We seem to be frozen in some time warp where we feel we must stay there. And I'm wondering, and this is a question for you, Dr. Bruinsma, I'm wondering to what extent the way we train our pastors at the seminary in Andrews keeps us where we are. We know that General Conference leadership has a real interest in what happens at the seminary, what gets taught. And I'm wondering if the seminary itself is not a barrier to innovation. And maybe our students there should have to take a couple of classes in innovation and creativity. So I'm just wondering what role that might play in our churches kind of being stuck, so to speak. Thank you.
Well, you underline what I also mentioned in my talk, and that is if you want to change something and want to make the local community a more important part of church life, you need to get the permission from on high. Now, unfortunately, there is that kind of top-down authority situation that has developed over time. But there is, unfortunately, a mentality at the top of the church to be against innovation. Now, when I say that, they would, of course, deny that. And innovation is, I think, as they see it and implement it, merely cosmetic. And it may have to do with a bit of new technology. But actually giving liberty, giving permission to experiment, to do new things at the other levels of the church, that has been blocked. Ordination of women being one point, significant point that has been blocked for so long. So, and the seminary, and somebody has been speaking about the bubble of the seminary recently, but the seminary is very much they're controlled by the General Conference in many ways. They have to be very careful in the way they operate, what they say, what they publish. And there are lots of things that many people would want to say, would want to do, but they can't because they would be in danger of losing their jobs or at least losing their influence. So it boils down to, I think, that we need to have top leadership at the GC, but also at the various divisions that tells people, okay, go ahead, try things. And that will not constantly look whether people are totally in all details following Adventist teachings and traditions, but are that kind of freedom is needed in order to bring about innovations that go further than just cosmetic changes. And I hope that someday that will happen in the church, because if it doesn't, then there's little hope that things can change and that some of the trends that we have been discussing can be reverted. Yeah, that would be my response to what you just said.
I just realized that I was speaking while muted. Thank you. Great response. We actually did get a couple more hands, so I think we can go to them before we possibly wrap things up. Rosalie was next. I'll ask you to unmute and ask your question.
I don't have so much of a question. I've been listening from the very inception of this afternoon, and I have one or two comments. I, like another gentleman earlier, been through the whole Adventist education process from stem to stern, and both of my grandfathers were pioneer pastors in South America and in mostly Inter-America division. So I have been steeped in it. But I remember my grandmother telling me when I would ask her some of these same questions, she said, these are the same questions we asked as young people back in 1925. She lived to be 101. And she said, nothing has changed. Everybody's still saying, how do we keep our young people in? She said, you know how we started doing it? We started looking to see what it is they liked that did not involve compromise. So although she was the pastor's wife, she held a lot of socials. Yes, my grandfather had Sabbath service, but he also had Sunday night service. Every week, the whole community came out. Church was packed Sunday night. And now I see, as I've gotten older, some of those, excuse me, same people are now Seventh-day Adventists. They got used to being in our churches. The hymns are the same, the Bible is the same, and basically, every Bible story is the same, whether you are Baptist, Anglican, or Seventh-day Adventist. Daniel still stood in his window and prayed. It doesn't change. And so a lot of the problem that we have is that we don't try to find common ground, and we don't want to do anything that's modern. Everything has to be the same way it was 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. Someone mentioned the General Conference. I've been to every GC session since 1980. And although I'm in that age group that somebody talked about that I don't want to mention, the fact is that GC has become boring even to me because it's not keeping up with things, you know? And you would think, okay, at my age, that's the age that it's geared to, but it's become boring. You know, I like to clap in church when the music is wonderful, but it's been discouraged. And I like to see movement, and I like to hear things that are upbeat, and we have to change our way of doing things. There's a lot that you can do that does not compromise doctrine, that does not compromise the gospel of Jesus Christ. Jesus was one for change. That's why they didn't like him, because he believed in change, but he didn't come to be radical. Those are half of my remarks.
Well, yes, they are remarks rather than questions, but thank you for those remarks because they're very pertinent. Thank you very much.